So thank you again for being with us all today. We've got 3 presentations lined up. They're going to be back to back to back, and then we'll have 30 minutes or so for a Q&A session. So we have with us today 3 presentations. So we're going to start off with Claire Milgate, who is the Street Youth Legal Services lawyer for Justice in Children and Youth out of Toronto. She's going to be speaking about youth homelessness prevention from a lawyer's perspective. Then we're going to have Jeff Messier and Nicole Jackson coming to us to talk about data linkage and the protective nature of youth programming. And then we're going to have Dr. Erin Day and Anita Desai to speak about pursuing justice, bilateral interactions among criminal justice and housing sectors for preventing homelessness. So we'll start with Claire. I'll bring you up.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. I'll just open up my notes here. Just start slideshow there?
Yeah, just good.
Great. Everyone enjoy lunch? I didn't have lunch. I worked through, so forgive me if I faint. I know it's fine. We've had some really wonderful presentations so far, and I feel very privileged to have 20 minutes of your time today to talk about my work as a lawyer working with young people experiencing homelessness. I hope we'll finish my presentation today with a better understanding of what it means when we talk about child rights and how these fundamental principles can be applied in your everyday work in a very practical way. I hope we'll develop a deeper understanding of the role of a lawyer and how they can be helpful for vulnerable young people. We'll also do a little exercise, and I hope that will give you some practice spotting common legal issues faced by young people. I'll also invite you to investigate and explore legal resources that might be available to you, and that you might be able to cultivate in your own jurisdictions when you go home. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to take away some very practical skills. I want to start, though, with an introduction to the legal clinic that I work at, Justice for Children and Youth. We advance and protect the legal rights and dignity of children and youth. We're a legal aid clinic, so we're partly funded by the government, partly a non-profit charity. We provide legal services all across Ontario to young people who are under 18 and to young people experiencing housing precarity or homelessness up to the age of 25, or young people experiencing precarious immigration status up to 25. We are expert in legal issues that are uniquely experienced by children and youth. So we are expert in that client group, not in any one particular area of law. The best way to understand the work that we do and the real strength of Justice for Children and Youth is to think about a typical client. So let me give you the example of a 16-year-old leaving home. They might have had difficulty obtaining their belongings and personal identification from their family. They might have difficulty registering for school independently and accessing income supports. There might be criminal charges or victimization. And then as a result of court conditions, their connection to supportive relationships and housing is ruptured. They might also struggle to secure housing, to navigate different services. They may need access to mental health support. I'm sure that sounds like a really typical client for all of us in the programs we're working in. For that client, there's a number of different legal rights arising, a number of different legal issues, and we serve the whole client. So we are expert in each of those areas of law and can work with that young person in each of those areas. We are the one point of contact for that client. They don't have to have multiple lawyers and have a sort of fractured service, we're able to serve that whole client. The Street Youth Legal Services Program is the program that I run. It's a unique program. It's been in place for over 20 years. I stand in some very big shoes. We provide legal services, information, advice, referrals, and individual representation to young people experiencing homelessness who are under 25. Everyone okay over there? The whole idea of the program is to improve access to justice. As I say to young people in my workshops, we bring the lawyer to you. You don't have to go to a glass tower downtown, which is very intimidating and scary and not accessible. I make myself available through attending drop-ins and other places where young people congregate, so that I become a familiar face. Young people can approach me with their questions and their legal issues and improve their understanding of legal rights in that way. I also provide workshops at shelters, so often, or drop-in spaces. So for example, an employment program may invite me to do a workshop on employment rights in the workplace. I also do workshops to, like an Ask Me Anything about, and often those touch on interactions with police and navigating the criminal justice system. I provide training for shelter staff and frontline workers so that they can better identify legal issues and better understand legal resources available to them to assist young people. And I provide direct representation where possible. And as I tried to illustrate in that initial scenario, that's typically in cases where there are multiple legal issues and they are intersecting with other systems, like the mental health services, criminal justice system, and others. So that's a little bit about the program that I run. I want to talk about taking a child's rights-based approach. Child rights are a core tenet of the work that we do. And I've heard already at this conference from so many inspiring professionals who are working in this space. And I want to encourage us all to think about how child rights can really ground the work that we do and be implemented in all of our work in very practical ways. Let's start firstly, though, with an understanding of what are child rights. They come from the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, which recognizes children are entitled to recognition of their rights and respect for their inherent dignity. Recognizing child rights in our work involves recognizing and accounting for children's evolving capacity to understand information and options available to them. It involves respecting their views and preferences on decisions impacting them. And it involves supporting them to make choices and decisions when they're able to. So as supportive adults in children's lives, we can support a child rights approach by recognizing that these rights are not earned and they cannot be taken away, that all children are deserving of these protections and support as of right. And as adults, we can ensure children have meaningful participation in the decisions that impact them and support them in making choices. What does that really look like? Let's get down even further into the nitty-gritty. Think about in your organization, you likely have a consent to share information document, right? You might be sitting down with a young person looking through a housing agreement. You might have a rights and responsibilities document in your organization that you hand over to a young person. Respecting child rights involves educating that young person about their rights. So making sure they really understand the information contained in those documents helping them to make decisions about what to do in your in your work with them. That might be signing a lease agreement, deciding whether to report a crime, deciding between different income support options, really understanding and really thinking about, sorry, wow, this has really gone off the rails. Okay, giving options, so educating young people about their rights, explaining everything, assisting a young person to develop skills for decision-making and personal advocacy. Thinking about that in all the work that we do. Okay. So I want to transition now to thinking about how engaging a lawyer as part of your prevention team can be helpful for the young people we work with. Breaches of legal rights often precede a young person's experience of homelessness and can hinder their exit from homelessness. As the adults supporting young people, we can often identify different issues in a young person's life as problems, but we might not realize that their legal rights are engaged and that talking to a lawyer can be helpful. Even when we do recognize a problem as a legal issue, it can be difficult to access accurate legal information and navigate legal resources and referrals. The legal profession is famously inaccessible. I want to try to give you some tools today that can help address some of those barriers and that difficulty to access. So let's start with understanding what is a lawyer. How can they be helpful? So our relationship always starts with a client, always starts with a clear retainer. These are our professional obligations. We have to explain to a young person exactly what we're agreeing to do with them. We are required to take instructions from the client. That means we engage with the client initially to understand their goals and needs, and that is really what drives our work with the client. We are obligated to provide competent advice, explain benefits and risks, ensure our client understands all of their options, not just the ones that we like for them and that we hope they choose, and we listen to the young person and support them in making decisions and choices. Unlike other professionals, we're bound by really strict rules of confidentiality. We need consents to share any information. Everything a young person says to a lawyer is protected by solicitor-client privilege, so that means we have to have consent. And we prefer it in writing, of course. We're also required to avoid any conflicts of interest. The young person is the decision maker, and we need to listen to their instructions and advocate on their behalf, protect their interests only. That means we're not necessarily a good mediator. We can't straddle a line. We're an advocate. We can't share information. We can't advocate for someone else's interests, as well as our clients. So, how can a lawyer help? And how can you help? Let's think about a lawyer as part of that prevention team. I've highlighted in red the areas where I feel we can work as a team, and then in black are the areas where where only a lawyer can act. So awareness and knowledge of legal rights. I will provide you with some resources today to help you build awareness and knowledge of legal rights, but I encourage you to explore resources that may be available to you in your own jurisdiction. Identifying legal issues. So again, we're going to do some practice of that today with a scenario. Helping to identify and conserve evidence. Young people are not always thinking about that in the moment. That's a way that you can assist. Thinking about photos, videos, things in writing. Referring to legal resources, so building our networks and our capacity to know, do we have legal clinics? Do we have private lawyers available? Do we know different legal resources to contact? And try to build those before the critical moment where they're needed. And then a lawyer can be engaged to provide legal advice and to provide advocacy and representation. Those are roles that should really only be undertaken by lawyers. And then I love working with other professionals to really try to engage as a team so that we're able to continue that relationship in a really fulsome way, supporting meetings and communication and, tracking people down and supporting in that way. So lawyers can also be a really big part of that education piece as well. And that's part of the workshops that I provide in youth spaces. And I would encourage you to look at resources available in your jurisdiction where lawyers, it's a common practice for legal clinics in Ontario to provide those kind of workshops. It's part of their mandate. So if you're in Ontario, I encourage you to reach out to your legal clinic and thinking about those resources available. Oops. Okay, so let's do some skill building. I'm going to encourage you to get out a writing implement, or if you're really good, you could just do it in your brain. And we're going to do some legal issue spotting. I've got a scenario here, I'm going to read it, and I want you to think about some legal issues that arise in it. Okay, here we go. We got 5 minutes, cool. Okay, a 16-year-old arrives at your program. They've been physically abused at home and they don't get along with their parents at all. There's a lot of fighting. The parents won't give the young person their ID, their phone, or any other pieces of their belongings. They're having a difficult time with school administration. The school continues to request parental consent and is not respecting the young person's privacy. They're sharing information with the parents about attendance and progress at school. They have no income. So I've got 5 minutes, so I'm going to skip ahead. How many of these did you get? So a couple of the legal issues I spot would be the legal right to your own property and seeking the return of their possessions, especially their ID. Whether you want to, talking to the young person about engaging child protective services, how might they be able to assist? Is it through income support? Is it through some other type of, have they had any involvement in the past? But really giving the young person information about what that engagement would involve so that they can make an informed choice and decision around that. The right to withdraw from parental control. In Ontario, that's available as of right to withdraw. You don't need to go to court. There's no process of emancipation like in the US. So understanding what is that right and how do you assert it as a young person. The right to register independently for school. So this is under the Education Act. Young people able to register and then also protect their privacy, protect the information that's in their Ontario student record, their OSR. Privacy and access to health information might also be relevant, thinking about that, and also what income support is available to them. Ontario Works, through the Visor in Ontario, or is there parental support? Could you make an application to court for parental support where that's really only available where parents are employed and financially eligible? Okay, I'm going to skip forward through, I put in some common legal needs for newcomer homeless youth because I think that's a big issue that a lot of us are facing in our programs. Certainly, we are seeing a lot of issues around childhood arrivals without status. That's an enormous legal issue, very complex, that really requires assistance from a lawyer. Assisting young people to apply for permanent residence once they have convention refugee status. And advising young people with PR to then progress on to citizenship. Because without that, if they have engagement with the criminal justice system, they can be at risk of removal if that's a serious charge and they end up with a serious conviction. So certainly seeing issues around competency of counsel in refugee matters, and some of the other legal issues we see for young people are exacerbated for newcomer youth. So I just wanted to put up, we'll miss some of this. I mentioned your role in assisting young people to think about evidence, things in writing, videos and photos, screenshots, thinking about it through that lens of evidence. Does it have a date? Is it clear? Is it contemporaneous, if you're thinking about records, and trying to assist young people to make those applications to police, to hospitals, to assist them in any potential claim. Okay, let's think about legal resources available in your jurisdictions. Do you know a source of reliable information? I'll show you some in a moment that are available online. Do you know how to access lawyers, either through legal aid, contacting your local law society, so those are provincially based? Do you know lawyers that will offer services pro bono? Do you know how to develop those contacts? And I just want to put a bit of a call to action here. The American Bar Association has a homeless youth legal network. They have identified providers of legal services across the country and connected them all. They have a survey out right now trying to identify similar services across the world. And I think it would be excellent if Canada could participate and really put ourselves on a map as providers of this type of service. But I don't know if anyone's really aware. So ABA Global Network of Lawyers, if you're aware of people providing legal service in your jurisdiction, please let them know about the survey so they can participate and we can build that network within Canada. Here's a picture of our website. I encourage you to engage with it. Here's a picture of Steps to Justice. It's another fantastic legal resource in Ontario. I treat this like Google for legal information. And here's my contact information. Thanks so much, everyone. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Claire. We're going to transition now over to Jeff and Nicole to present. I'm just going to pull up the, you got it. There we go. Ooh, there we go.
All right, we're good.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nicole Jackson. I use she and her pronouns, and my colleague Jeff and I are joining from Treaty 7 territory out in Calgary, Alberta. Excited to speak to you today about some of the work that we did around data linkage to build our case around prevention investments and sort of a larger moving forward of this data linkage type of research. We would be remiss to not both thank our funders and give the usual caveat that their finding or that our findings are not theirs. Here we go. Trellis, which is the organization I work for, does a whole wide range of all kinds of social services that you think about when you're in this field. We do high school graduation promotion. We run the youth shelter in Calgary. We do after school care. We do youth programming, all kinds of supports for youth with various types of vulnerabilities. And we're always stuck on this question, how do we prove that prevention works? How do you prove that the bad thing didn't happen because we did the upstream good thing? The programs are designed to build protective factors and prepare young people for transitioning to adulthood. And we realized in this collaboration that one of the best tests of the program's efficacy is measuring whether our people show up in the adult homelessness system. Of course, there's lots of ways we could measure it, right? How can we tell if a program is doing a good job of preparing a young person? We might talk to staff. That's like pretty easy to conduct, but it's limited in scope. We might chat with young people. Of course, that's our best primary source. But again, once youth leave our systems and are ideally off flourishing in the world, that's a challenging data loop to close. And of course, then we're left with administrative data, which captures everybody's experience, but there are some challenges to overcome in terms of using that data to answer our research question. If this phrase administrative data is new to you, here's just a quick snapshot. It's the data that records what happens to a person when they access a service. So for the purposes of our research project and this conference, homelessness administrative data typically captures things like what nights was a person in shelter, what programs were they enrolled in, when were they intaked and discharged, what happened during their program involvement, are they on any wait lists. Of course, the challenge of using this data, as you all know, is that I have a little bit, and you have a little bit, and they have a little bit, and it's challenging to get it all in one sort of data universe. And of course, because we're not quite at whole city collaboration, there's no one unique identifier. We have problems like nicknames. And so the data linkage work that Jeff, myself, and our partners did is key to understanding how people move through the system. The goal ultimately of this research was to link data to understand whether that upstream work, that high school graduation investment, after school care types of programming is effective in keeping young people out of the adult homeless serving system. How have people benefited from that youth programming or not? How do those interactions compare for people who were never in the Trellis universe, who maybe showed up in the adult homeless serving system? A bit of context for how we arrived at doing this research is important here. So Trellis is a large organization. We serve plus or minus 5,000 people in a year. We have plus or minus 400 staff. So our data set is gigantic. And part of my job and the resources we have at Trellis because of our scale is that I have some of the technical pieces where we can partner with people like Jeff and others in our sort of environment to be able to export and import and move around that data in ways that are compliant with the consent that we received from those young people during their intake. So we had the raw data at Trellis. The Calgary Homeless Foundation has all of the data in the adult serving system, kind of a HIFIS-ish, but a specific to Calgary data set. And then the University of Calgary, my colleague Jeff, had the expertise to link the data and analyze it. What I do want to draw your attention to, though, is it will not be news to you that it's hard to convince other large organizational bodies and systems like health or justice to share data. And part of the reason this project became a thing was sort of this unique mix. So we had some partnership meetings and we agreed collectively that it is unethical to collect data and not use it, and that we were uniquely positioned to leverage that data in a way that complies with preserving client privacy and all of our data obligations, which Jeff will speak to, but also use that to then inform our future systems investment. We also had system-level consent for anonymized data use. So when we do intakes at Trellis, the release of information, the FOIP bits, and all of the consent language allow for certain types of aggregated data use, which means we didn't have to ask each of those 5,000 youth if we could use their data. We had preliminary consent, also from the CHF data set from the Homeless Foundation. That was an important sort of enabler. And then there was an important role for U of C in terms of having a trusted third-party partner who sort of lives in that a little bit one step removed, a bit of an objective perspective. Of course, project governed by things like ethics approval and a shared understanding of what we were doing. So that U of C also was important in moving us forward. I'll turn it over to Jeff for the technical bits.
Yes, enter the nerdy person. Okay, well, thank you. I'm the engineer. Okay, so as Nicole said, we had this really, I think, unique opportunity to link data from the youth serving system with data from the adult serving system to see what happens when kids, quote unquote, graduate from the youth to the adult system of care. And Just a bit of background information about the data. So there was a lot of data to work through. To be relatively relevant and recent, we focused on people who had turned 18 in the last 10 years. So people who had quote unquote graduated in the last 10 years. On the youth data side, it was provided, of course, by our partners at the Trellis Society. 8,000 people accessing 67 different Trellis programs. On the adult side, the adult data provided by the Calgary Homeless Foundation, we had 3,000 people accessing 96 different programs. Lots more than that in the data, but these are just the people that satisfied this cohort requirement of needing to turn 18 in the last 10 years. Now, at CAH last year, I presented how you link data like this and preserve privacy. So I'm not going to dive into a lot of those technical details. This is a QR code to my YouTube presentation from last year, if you do want that detail. But just to sort of summarize what we did, we had to link on names and birth dates because there is no unique identifier. However, to protect privacy, those names and birth dates were encrypted by our data partners before being shared with the university under an ethics-approved data sharing agreement. So we had legal agreements in place both with the agencies and the relevant ministry. And and very critically, you need a third party to do this. So Trellis couldn't send their data to the Calgary Homeless Foundation, and the CHF couldn't send their data back to Trellis because, sure, you've encrypted the names, but you also, right beside it, have the plain text names as well. So you need to have a third party that you can work with. And I talk about those mechanics in that presentation. Once we had linked the data, this is sort of the group of people that we were working with. So it ended up that there were 10,000 unique people in the merged data set. 7,000 of those people only accessed Trellis services, didn't show up in the CHF data. 2,000 people only accessed Calgary Homeless Foundation services. They weren't part of any Trellis program. And 831 accessed both. So this is the cohort of kids who were in some form of Trellis youth programming and then did show up in the adult system of care. So it's always kind of interesting to sort of think about how to communicate, this data and someone's experience effectively. So the actual raw data that we had to work with were literally the single entry sort of data points for every single anonymized person accessing every single program at every single time. So to summarize that data, particularly when people moved into the adult system of care, which was a pretty complicated system, lots of different programs, we divided people's experience into sort of broad categories. So we defined somebody as being a heavy shelter user in the adult system if they stayed over 100 days in shelter. So if somebody stayed over 100 days in shelter, it didn't matter what else they were doing in the adult system of care, we classified them as a heavy shelter user. We classified somebody as primarily using housing resources in the adult system if they did not meet the heavy shelter user criteria and they had more days in housing than they had in shelter, right? So somebody spent the majority of time in shelter and they didn't break that 100-day mark. Someone was a light shelter user if they were not a heavy shelter user, they had more days in shelter than in housing, but they were still below that 100-day threshold. So this is the sort of the very temporary kind of light touch emergency shelter emergency shelter user. And some people just showed up only in case management. They were on a triage list for a program, but they never actually entered a shelter or housing program that we could see. So I've got some numbers and some pictures. We'll start out with the numbers. So we have two groups of people that we're interested in, right? People that were in Trellis programs and people that weren't. And we wanted to see what happened to those people when they transitioned into the adult system of care. So we had 831 kids that were in Trellis programming and then showed up in the adult system. Of those 831 kids, 3.73 were heavy shelter users, about 4% light shelter, 34% ended up in housing, 57-ish% showed up in case management, but they didn't actually access any services. On the other side, the 2,000 people are kids the same age that didn't take trellis programming, but found themselves in the adult system of care. Almost 8% of them ended up being heavy shelter users. About 18.5 were light shelter users, 27 housing, and 45 case management only. So what does this mean? If we look at these tables, we can see that people, again, exactly the same age, that were in trellis programming were a lot less likely to make use of shelter. And so this is that protective factor that Nicole was alluding to. So people in trellis programs, when compared with people exactly the same age, were about a little more than 2 times less likely to be a heavy shelter user, about 4 times less likely to be a light shelter user, and about 22% more likely to be in housing. And so that's where you know, if you're a numbers person, you can say, well, you know, these are your stats. But it's also interesting to look at pictures. I think it's more interesting to look at pictures. So what is this diagram exactly? This diagram shows flow from the adult or from the youth system into the adult system. And I have to stay so close to this microphone, and the screen is very far away. But on the left-hand side, we see all of the different experiences a kid could have in trellis. So you could just be in a club, you could be in general programming. As you get closer to the bottom, there's group home kids, there's kids that access either youth or family shelter, there's kids that were in youth to adult programming, and some family housing kids as well. In the middle of the diagram shows how people made use of the adult system of care. So were they a heavy shelter person, were they a light shelter person, or a housing person? Right at the far right shows what they were doing when we last saw them in the adult data, right? And I refer to this as sort of their exit, right? So did someone enter shelter, and was their very last day in the data shelter? And the reason why that's important is we want, if you are accessing the adult system of care, you know, a good transition might be somebody who makes a light touch in shelter, but then transitions into housing, and the last time we saw them, they were in a housing program. A less good transition would be someone who lands in a housing program, but then the last time we saw them, they were in shelter, right? Again, administrative data has a lot of pros and cons, right? Like on the advantage of administrative data is it has a very large scope, right? Like it's very easy to see lots of people. The disadvantage is that it's very skeletal in a sense, right? It lacks detail, it lacks nuance. And so we can sort of speculate that somebody, you know, going from housing to shelter has had a negative exit, but we don't really know, right? The other 2 more pictures to show you. This is a zoom in of what the experience looks like for people without trellis programming, right? So they start with no trellis background at all, and then they flow into either housing, light shelter use, or heavy shelter use. And we can see maybe slightly less than half of people show up in housing. Slightly more end up being in shelter, you know, with a kind of a significant chunk of heavy shelter users. Some of those heavy shelter users do peel off onto the case management or housing exits, which is positive, but a big chunk of them start heavy shelter users and they remain heavy shelter users. It's interesting though, so this is the picture of people without protective youth programming. This is how the picture changes with youth programming. So these are the 831 people that had the benefit of youth programming that found themselves in the adult system of care. Lots more blue here, right? If people in youth programming wind up in the adult system, the vast majority of them are in a housing program, right? That's what they're doing there. We do see some kids land as heavy shelter users, some kids land as light shelter users, but it's a much lower proportion, right? So these pictures are showing the same thing that the numbers show, right? It's just maybe more colorful and better. I think they're better.
Back to some more words. Thanks, Jeff. Ultimately, we, to Jeff's point, know that administrative data is only one way we talk about the young people that we serve, right? Embedded in these charts are so many stories and complex interactions in terms of systems. However, you all know that we exist in a world where governments in particular are interested in things like outcomes, and particularly aggregated outcomes. We talk a lot to our teams about how the anecdote of a young person's trajectory and their service pathway is incredibly important to describe the work that we do in one context. And with other stakeholders, they want to hear about 1,000 of those stories aggregated onto one chart that gives them a sense of the overall efficacy. These findings ended up providing us really meaningful proof for ongoing investment and advocacy prevention programs. It is so challenging typically to tell the story about something that may never happen, and yet this gave us some very meaningful data. It also built the foundation for some future research collaborations. For instance, we're doing a bunch of work at Trellis around the impact of group care in terms of child welfare involvement and then later in life involvement in the homeless serving system. Being able to go program by program allows us to examine those profiles and ask really hard questions about our own involvement in those outcomes and how we might change, better impact the pathway of those young people, because we literally have proof of this particular cohort and this research. And it lets us ask better research questions. I think one of the exciting things about working in this context was we now have this data set, and the three of us partners gathered back together to sort of make sense of these diagrams. And we'd sit on these calls and toggle things back and forth, and we'd say to Jeff, well, okay, what if we isolated this group of people? Or what if we isolated maybe the parents and took the kids out of the mix? And it just allows us to really explore and dive deeper in a way that's not dependent on a particular person's story or trajectory, but really looks at this aggregated piece. Ultimately, our takeaway from this work was that youth programming is meaningfully effective at reducing adult homelessness and experience with shelter systems and other support systems. And that strategic partnerships do provide new insights that support systems change. Each of the three partners in this work takes this to their advocacy spaces differently, and it's been a really meaningful set of findings to take back to our partners. You can get in touch with us to learn more stuff.
Yes.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you both. Now we're going to transition back over to Aaron and Anita to come up and speak with us. And I'll get your presentation set up here. Here we go. That's you.
You're not coming, Anita? You're just going to hang it over there? Yeah, I can. That's okay. It's okay. You're comfortable. You're comfortable. That's what's Thank you so much for being here. This is such an exciting opportunity to be able to talk about criminal justice involvement at CAEH. I think it's a rarely talked about issue at this conference. Cedar Michelle did amazing work last year to be able to bring light to this, and so I'm excited to be able to carry on this conversation with my colleague Anita. So what we'd like to do with our 20 minutes with you is tell you about this project that we've been working on for the last 2 years, thanks to funding from Making the Shift to be able to make it happen, about that intersection of youth justice and youth homelessness. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time with you letting you know about what the project looked like, and then I'm going to turn it over to Anita, who's going to get into the good stuff about the solutions that were drawn from it. So Anita and I are here, but we are representing a whole team of wonderful people who supported us and allowed us to do this work. In particular, we worked with three incredible lived experts who were really helpful in providing insights and sort of carving the path for us at all stages of this project. So I want to give an extra shout out to Neo, Ethan, and Fialka for their help with this. So what we wanted to do was look at I mean, it's such an academic word, bi-directional, but but what does it actually mean? What does it look like when the youth justice and the youth homelessness sectors interact with one another? And what is it like for those young people who are experiencing those systems? And so we wanted to explore that quite intentionally. So I, have spent a lot of time in the homelessness sector. Anita spends time in the criminal justice sector. And just even the conversations we were having with each other really made it clear that not enough of these conversations were happening. And we're talking very similar, but maybe using different language. And what do we have to do to bring these sectors together? So our goal was to look at how the youth justice system can reduce young people being discharged into homelessness. And then the flip side is how do we ensure that the youth homelessness sector can provide rapid exits and sustainable exits from homelessness so that young people don't become involved with the criminal justice system at all or become further involved with the system. So how we did that is we were able to reach people from across 4 regions. So we worked in BC, the Prairies, Ontario, and the Atlantic. And the first thing we did is conduct a survey with 73 respondents, really looking at trying to understand what are the common issues between these two sectors. So we reached out to both the youth justice and the youth homelessness sectors to understand what those conversations need to be and where do we see that overlap. We then held an initial roundtable, so one in each of those 4 regions, where we identified these common problems, these common challenges across the 2 sectors. And then earlier this year, I can't believe it was this year, we held a second round of roundtables that focused on generating solutions. We wanted to make sure that this wasn't work in renaming the problems that we already know we have. We wanted it to be as solutions driven as possible. And so we spent a chunk of time identifying and then trying to activate some of those solutions. So what we came up with, based on all that work, was 14 solutions to these intersecting problems that Anita will describe to you. Before I turn it over to Anita to understand what those solutions are, just to let you know what those key driving strategic problem areas were that we identified. So this comes from both the survey and that first round of roundtables. Overall, the first of the key themes was the challenges around service eligibility and access to services. So there's a lot of different, especially because we're working across Canada, a lot of different policy barriers, practice barriers that prevented youth with justice involvement from being able to access housing and supports and programs in the homelessness and housing sectors. So this is things like eligibility criteria, having arbitrary age definitions, requiring some kind of stable income. ID was a big issue, having mandates or requirements around being enrolled in education, or different barriers related to things like probation or no contact orders that we don't hear a lot about. We also heard about youth having, really struggling to navigate these incredibly complex systems and a lack of culturally appropriate services and structures. The second strategic problem area was policy funding and alignment. Not a surprise, money's an issue. So this was talking about looking at these siloed funding models that makes these coordination. I mean, we just heard about how hard it was, from a privacy perspective, to work with justice and health and things like that. So when everything is siloed, how to support young people who are transitioning out of the justice system into independent living, and supporting those vulnerably housed youth to avoid that criminal justice involvement in the first place. And then finally, coordinated service delivery and engagement. So this fragmentation within and across primarily government departments, across different orders of government, but even within a particular order of government, across the different departments within that same order. So let's say the provincial government, related to, child welfare, to health, to justice, to schools, as well as the housing systems. And also what came from this was how the nonprofit sector itself can also be fragmented. And this leads to poor outcomes for young people who might disengage if their needs aren't being met. So as we did this work, and we worked really hard to be, again, solutions-driven and solutions-oriented, a few things kept coming up over and over and over again that we came to realize were our, North Star, were our driving guidelines on what we wanted these solutions to be and what they wanted to look like. So we identified 5 principles that have to, in our minds, guide any of this work and any of this transformation that we're pushing for here. So any kind of change within and collaboration with the youth homelessness and the youth justice sectors, we argue need to be grounded in these key, unwavering principles that inform policy and programs and interventions and advocacy. So any of the 14 solutions that Anita's going to now talk about need to come from and have within them these 5 guiding principles. None of them are going to be a surprise to you, but I'm going to say them anyway. The first is, I don't know where it is on that, upholding housing as a human right. I'm actually not going to spend, because we're all here and I know we're all on the same page with housing as a human right. But so recognizing that inherent right as fundamental to any of the solutions that we provide. The second is decolonizing systems and practices. So systems change means undoing the harm of ongoing colonization on Indigenous peoples and actively working towards reconciliation. So really action-oriented. The third is that we need to make sure that as we're implementing solutions and as we're trying to find ways, creative ways to access housing for young people and things like that, that we aren't inadvertently further criminalizing or keeping young people within the criminal justice system any longer than they absolutely have to be. So we want to really be cautious about expanding that carceral net. The fourth is that we need to mitigate interlocking forms of oppression. So all the solutions that were developed through this work came from an anti-oppression lens. So this means interrogating the ways that culture and community for youth experiencing inequities and making spaces and opportunities open, welcoming, and inclusive for all youth. And last but certainly not least is ensuring that young people are guiding this work. Again, I know I'm speaking to a lot of people here who understand that and get that. But none of this work can change. The policies and programs can't change unless the people who are experiencing it are at the center of that work. And so ensuring that young people are part of these solutions, having them on boards and things like that is key to engaging people in this work. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Anita, who's going to let you know about the solutions.
Thank you, Erin. Okay, I'll pop you over to the solutions. There we go. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to take you through the solutions for today that were generated from this project. And I'll start by saying that the solutions are consistent with the literature that highlights, I'll use that word again, bidirectional relationship we focused on between youth homelessness and youth justice system involvement. It will probably be no surprise to this audience that the challenges for youth experiencing both homelessness and justice system involvement are interconnected, and they stem from structural inequities, system failures, and power imbalances that directly lead to marginalization and discrimination of young people in Canada. So this is why it's so important to keep the guiding principles that Erin just mentioned in mind as the first step to engaging with any of the solutions I'm about to unpack with you. So I will now take you through the 14 solutions that emerged from our analysis, which we categorized under each of those 3 strategic problem areas that Erin mentioned briefly a few slides back. This is going to be a bit of a rapid-fire, high-level summary of each solution due to the time that's available, but I think it's really important to note that for each of the 14 solutions that we came up with, our team generated action-oriented pathways for change makers for various stakeholders among the Government of Canada, provincial and territorial governments, municipal governments, and community-based agencies so that they could begin working on implementation of these solutions. So those exist within the broader report. So here goes. So the first strategic problem area is service eligibility and access, and we have 4 solutions targeted in this area. So first off, we need to establish more mechanisms to enable early and comprehensive discharge planning from youth justice. Young people exiting the justice system need clear, thorough plans grounded in successful, sustainable transitions. Comprehensive discharge planning provides support across essential things like housing, employment, food security, physical and mental health, education, and social inclusion and life skills. So the discharge planning process should really use a person-centered approach and coordinate with the youth support team. There's also some implications for the YCJA specifically, but I'll speak to that in the Q&A portion for those who are maybe interested in how legislation factors into our solutions. So for solution 2, empowering service providers to respond with urgency. Youth are at a really vulnerable stage in their life where the timing of having their needs met can make a world of difference. In particular, when a young person has particularly urgent needs, the ability to coordinate a response to prevent justice system involvement or homelessness should not hinge on wait times for support. The transition from a youth justice facility is also an especially important time to capitalize on momentum that a youth might have developed while they were in custody. And the timelines really just need to work for youth, and service providers need to be empowered to give them what they need when they need it. For solution 3, establishing a consistent definition of youth across sectors can create consistency in care for young people by improving collaboration between service providers. Also, revising age requirements away from chronological age and more towards developmental age may also allow more youth to receive support, services, and continuity of care based on their needs rather than just based on their age. And it can improve policies for youth and reduce interactions with adult systems. The fourth solution, rural youth face displacement from their home communities and supports when pushed to access services in other locations. So in turn, this increases the service demands on urban centers to meet those needs. With many youth justice facilities facing closures across the country, the number of justice-involved youth that are being displaced from their communities has increased significantly. Creating more upstream prevention investments in rural communities for youth housing supports creates protective factors against homelessness and justice system involvement. So enhancing access to services in rural areas can really ensure that youth who remain within their communities can stay close to their natural supports. And there's a great model if you look up the RAFT for why and how programs and services should be expanded and accessible to everyone living within a specific catchment area. So, funding and policy alignment. Spoiler alert, this is the one that had the most solutions in it. There's 6 solutions for this area. So solution number 5 is increasing discretionary funding and having flexibility and eligibility. What we heard was that youth should have access to social assistance programs without barriers for financial support. Access to financial resources is the first step to obtaining safe, adequate housing, and youth should be provided this support regardless of their age. And then just to the point about flexibility and eligibility, justice-involved youth should continue to receive full income during their time in custody. If their housing costs were previously being paid directly by the social assistance provider, it should continue to do so. We tried to pin it down, but the reports that were available suggest that youth are incarcerated for pretty short periods of time, so between sort of 1 to 3 months. So continuing to have the opportunity to receive financial support while in custody can protect a young person from becoming homeless upon their release and gives them a few more options for accessing housing that is appropriate for their unique needs. Solution 6 is pretty straightforward. To increase retention and reduce high turnover rates, staff working within the homelessness and justice sectors should receive remuneration which reflects the hard work that they do supporting youth with complex needs. Paying staff adequately, providing comprehensive benefits and a pension plan contributes to employee wellness and retention. With respect to training, staff working with youth should also be provided with ongoing training and professional development to really ensure that they have the knowledge and the skills required to work with youth who have increasingly complex needs. For solution 7, building cross-sectoral community collaboration will better support homeless and/or justice-involved young people in accessing multiple services. Coordination between multiple agencies is essential to ensure that youth receive the care and support that they need. Organizational knowledge sharing, while ensuring youth's privacy where appropriate, of course, can identify and thereby address gaps in services. Regular, consistent knowledge sharing across community agencies can increase the extent to which key stakeholders understand the role that each sector plays in the care of that young person. For solution 8, structuring funding frameworks to evaluate success from a youth-centered lens. It means investing in youth-centered approaches to policy and practice that can provide the greatest opportunity for meeting their unique needs. So rather than outcomes-based models of evaluation, we heard that accountability should be to the youth that the organizations work with, rather than to say the organization or the funder's preferred goals or outcomes. For solution 9, ensuring that all orders of government take responsibility for prevention in both of these sectors requires cross-jurisdictional collaboration between federal and provincial or territorial ministries. We heard about the importance of considering investments and collaborations that just account for building up the social system as a whole. For solution 10, we heard that in order to be in alignment with reconciliation, Indigenous communities should have autonomy over their community, specifically in regard to the administration of justice and social housing delivery. It is also important that the colonial continuum within housing be disrupted by resituating the definition of housing from a means of shelter to more of a relational connection. As such, Indigenous communities deserve the rights to define, create, and fund their own social housing initiatives. There's also a need for a decolonial approach to the justice process that prioritizes a holistic framework which emphasizes the self-governance of Indigenous peoples. So then for the third strategic problem area, coordinated service delivery and engagement, there are 4 solutions here. So solution 11 is about services and supports for young people that should be culturally appropriate, relevant, and responsive to their unique needs. Aligning supports with youth's culture and beliefs allows organizations to build a trusting relationship with them. Youth justice and homelessness or housing programs should include considerations for the histories, traditions, beliefs, languages, and value systems of culturally diverse groups. Most importantly, the services should promote a sense of cultural identity and belonging. Specifically, the YCJA, the Youth Criminal Justice Act, emphasizes the need to respond to the needs of Indigenous young persons and young persons with special requirements. For solution 12, to streamline practices, youth need support to navigate the complex systems of justice and homelessness. We heard across all of the regions that we engaged with about the importance of being able to create a warm handover. Programs should have the capacity to provide aftercare and bridging supports to ensure that young people do not fall through the cracks when transitioning from child welfare to justice or vice versa, aging out of systems, or transitioning to housing. A single point of contact approach, such as establishing system navigators to offer aftercare, outreach, or liaison services, would provide more organized, streamlined practices. Success in this area means that youth would have an easier time obtaining resources, so for example, locating and signing up for services, so that they stay engaged with their support systems. Solution 13 is about building attachment to community and natural supports, which is actually ingrained within the YCJA, which states that any measures taken against a young person who commits an offense should involve the parents, the extended family, the community and social or other agencies in the young person's rehabilitation and reintegration. The same principle should apply to services and supports in the housing and homelessness sector as well. Building and supporting existing connections to community and natural supports should be prioritized when working with the youth, and family should be defined by the individual young person. Creating a strong attachment village can protect youth against a re-involvement in the justice system or homelessness. And last but not least, solution 14 is about prioritizing individualized plans for youth. So bottom line is that one size fits none. Viewing the youth as individuals with unique backgrounds and needs means engaging in specialized planning that is centered around them personally. Increasingly, this entails enhanced support for youth with complex needs by building organizational knowledge and capacity that is tailored to them. It can also mean creating or enhancing programs that meet a wider range of needs, such as harm reduction models versus abstinence models, or like programs which are accessible to youth within the timelines that work for them, so adjusting for evenings and weekends. Creating individualized plans with these adaptations in mind can be strengthened and even further by leveraging the community partners that can provide holistic plans and wraparound supports. So in conclusion, I'm just going to note that this project was developed from the principle that all people across the country should have access to truly safe, truly affordable, and permanent housing. Anyone's involvement in the justice system should not preclude or impede their ability to attain housing. The journey of conducting the study revealed a multitude of ways that we can see this vision realized, by taking an informed approach alongside a wide range of willing collaborators. So we would encourage anyone who's ready for change to consider how they can implement any of the solutions listed in this report. To do so meaningfully will take courage to uphold housing as a human right, while also incorporating decolonizing and anti-oppression strategies. It also means active consideration for not expanding the criminal justice system, as Aaron mentioned, and including the voices of impacted youth in the decision-making processes. This work is hard, but we can take inspiration from those who have lived through far too many years of broken systems. And I'll end us off with a great, simple reminder from one of our youth advisors that we need to work extra hard to make sure that they do not fall through the cracks. So thank you. And if anyone's interested, thanks. We have a handout. We have a couple of hard copies, but if you want a handout of our solutions that actually have those pathways for change makers on them, please feel free to scan the code and we can get those to you. Thank you.
Amazing. One more round of applause for all of our presenters. So now we have a good 20 minutes or so for questions. We're going to take questions on all of the presentations. So just a reminder, we've covered a lot of ground today. We had a presentation from Claire on the role of lawyers in youth homelessness prevention. We've got Jeff and Nicole who spoke about data linkage and how that can demonstrate the efficacy of youth homelessness prevention efforts. And then finally, Aaron and Anita speaking about that bidirectional relationship between youth homelessness and youth justice. So I've got microphones and I will run around and take your questions. Please, you do need to speak into the mic because it's recorded, and if people are listening online, they can't hear you if you don't have a mic. So just raise your hand and I'll come around. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Such great presentations.
It's on. It's number one.
Okay. Okay, so my question is specifically for Jeff and Nicole. Really, really interesting in terms of the administrative data. I do work with administrative health data. And so that primarily, looks at health service utilization and diagnoses, but we don't really have a way of looking at like community services or like homeless supports or even people's sort of like housing status. So I'm wondering about a couple of things. So first of all, is there a way to link the data that you presented with health data?
So yes and no. Okay. So actually, full disclosure, I promised in my application for making the shift funding to link homelessness data to health data. That was the whole plan. Okay. I have not done that. And the reason is primarily due to the legislation. So in Alberta, most other provinces are similar. Different legislations govern health administrative data and homelessness administrative data, different ministries as well. And so to get permission to even do this project, we needed ministry level approval and agreements in place. And that's a lot of moving pieces, a lot of people to get to reply to your emails. And so we haven't done it yet, but there's still a lot of discussion. There's some cool stuff going on both in Manitoba and BC with linking health data with justice data. I believe BC is linking some health data to housing and homelessness data as well. But it has to happen at that ministry level, or this is kind of what I'm understanding. From a technical perspective, no problem, right? Like linking on names and birth dates, we've got the methods, we've got ways to do that to protect privacy, but it's the legal aspects of it.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. And then just the other question I was wondering, you had a slide where you presented, I'm assuming like individuals who accessed trellis programs, and it said versus those who did not access trellis programs. Does that mean that group were the individuals who only accessed like Calgary Homeless Foundation?
Yes, exactly.
Oh, okay. And was that like the comparison cohort?
Yeah,
oh,
exactly.
Okay. Great.
Exactly. Yeah.
And they
so
were youth though?
They were the same age, same age. Yeah, exactly. So you could think of it,
right.
It's not, it's rough, but you could think of it as the cohort the control group, the people that didn't have the intervention. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Were
right.
those 2,000 people.
Okay, and just the last question is, what was the time? Was there like a time frame, like over a course of years, or?
Yeah. So people that turned 18 in the last 10 years.
Oh, I see.
So
Right, so you said
I
that, yeah.
forget what dates of birth those would be, but yeah.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Just to also comment, two pieces. One is that the cohort who didn't have Trellis enrollment, of course, Trellis is one of many nonprofits in Calgary, right? So many question marks about who those young people are.
Yes.
The second is, I think this project was a bit thin edge of the wedge, in the sense that the story about prevention is not a huge indictment of anyone. And I suspect you and I both know that as soon as we do things like link health data and homelessness, right, it's a scathing indictment we expect of those systems' various gaps and failures. And so the risk, again, as somebody outside government and academia, is quite high. Mm-hmm. And so I think this was an interesting demonstration project with 3 willing partners, right, who that ended up with like a nice story that ultimately comments on social issues but upstream. And so I feel hopeful in that sense that it was like, look at us playing nicely in the sandbox. What other findings might we unlock? If that makes sense?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, thank you so much.
And I will say just quickly, like there are indications of homelessness in health administrative data. I've done a bit of work on that. There's ICD codes for homelessness and that kind of stuff, right? But it's always an undercount, right? Yeah, exactly.
This is for, is it working? Yeah, okay. This is for Claire, actually, regarding VISA funding. So I've worked with like shelter, but also community youth hub, and then now transitional housing with partnership with CAS specifically. So my question was, what is the rights for young people when it comes to VISA funding? Because I have seen a lot of barriers on like, if they weren't in the system prior to 16 years old, they may get denied VISA funding, but it appears that they have a right to VISA funding. Is that correct? If they're under the age of 18? Like, I just wanted to know more clarification questions around VISA funding and their rights between the ages of 16 and 18 and weren't in CAS involvement prior to 16.
Right. Mm-hmm. So it's not an absolute right.
Okay.
They need to be eligible, and the eligibility is in need of protection.
Okay.
That's the standard that the CAS, so the CAS will do an investigation and make that determination. There is not, at this stage, a legal avenue to appeal that decision. There is maybe some avenues within the CAS to appeal it, like administratively within the organization. And it's important to give the young person advice about what that investigation might look like. It can, depending on the CAS, there is a lot of like discretion among CASs about how those investigations are conducted. We've had ongoing discussions with CASs about the involvement of, like, for example, interviewing parents or caregivers, and whether that's actually required. So does that answer the question? It's not available as of right. It has to meet that standard of in need of
so there's
protection.
no advocacy around, like, if they did do an investigation, they did a kinship placement, but they still don't feel safe. There is nothing that we can do to advocate for VISA. Is that correct?
I mean, advocacy has a place.
Right.
100%.
Yeah.
But it is ultimately at the discretion of the CAS.
Fair enough.
Thanks. I have a question for Jeff and Nicole as well. It's so compelling to see that promising connection between the youth system and the adult system. Has there been any early advocacy with the result of this project? I would love to hear some promising stories of this getting some traction, or even some barriers or challenges with connecting these dots. I think that's a really important piece of the puzzle for advocacy on this issue. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. So this is recent, super recent finding, so we're baby steps. It will not surprise you, though, like our colleagues, that a lot of this work is about money. And so, as you know, and we're from Alberta, right? If that gives you just any other context, it's fine. So limited dollars. And coming out through major funding bodies, right? So we are dealing with big like envelopes of millions of dollars to fund various programs at our agencies. And I think we had a conversation last night actually about, of course, small nonprofits have advantages, right? Nimbleness, all that kind of stuff. We're quite a large scale nonprofit. And so to be able to have that scale and that data to say we can be one of the leading providers of upstream youth prevention program because we have a proven record. Please, keep investing in us. I think, I don't know how many dollars we could attach to that particular line of thinking, but as the person who often writes that content, it's incredibly useful to be able to point to something. To my point earlier, I think there's no end to these beautiful stories about changing lives. And yet when it comes to like an ROI or kind of that yucky funder space, this kind of collaboration to get to like a real number that skips over all the beautiful stories in a like kind of useful and kind of yucky way is useful in some contexts for some advocacy. I think it's also really compelling for some of the early interventions we're doing. So you saw clubs on the thing, which is like a call it 6 years old to 12 years old intervention. And because we offer services across the lifespan, there are actually clubs, youth who do pop up much later and who are these deeply complex youth. And so to be able to tell the story from both sides about when it didn't work and when it did has led to a lot of interesting conversations internally about how we might grab those early flags and respond differently to them. Yeah, make sense?
Okay, back over here.
And then back over.
Yeah, that's right.
Hi, thanks so much, everyone. My question is for Erin, and is it Jessica?
Anita.
Okay, yes. So I was wondering, I love your project. I'm just wondering if the young people and the research that you did, if you looked at intersections or bidirectional relationships between the eviction rental housing system and criminal justice processes. My research is focused on, and I do some research focused on that connection. And just the other day, I was speaking to a young person who was incarcerated. She had a rental place and the rent was being paid. But while she was incarcerated, her landlord decided that because she was involved in the criminal system, to pursue an eviction application. And of course, it all happened in her absence, so she couldn't attend her hearing. She was in jail. And so she would have been discharged to a place that was where her stuff was, but in fact she was discharged into homelessness because meanwhile the eviction system had been triggered by the criminal justice process. And then, so I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts about that, or if that came into play in your conversation at all.
I'll start and I'll let Erin correct me. But I don't think we had I think it was a little bit outside the scope of who we were able to tap into. So one of the ways we leveraged access to knowledge on this project was by tapping into a group called the National Youth Justice Network. And so that's comprised mostly of service providers. And so we really looked at, okay, there's a group of service providers that work with youth in this space. And we used them to actually snowball sample our survey to get that out to other service providers. I think that the ability for them to connect with individual landlords who are working with youth was that's not where the survey rolled out to. So I think our knowledge on that is probably pretty limited, but it sounds like we should talk to you afterwards. You want to add anything to that?
I had something, and now it's completely gone because I was listening to you, and I was like, so now I've lost what I was going to say. So.
All right.
Oh, yes, and now I remember. There we go. There we go. All right. It's after
Your 8
lunch.
seconds,
It's after
right?
lunch. Yeah, my 8 seconds. Yes, I'm a teacher, and then when we used to teach in Zoom, you would sit for 8 seconds of silence on those black squares, and somebody would answer after 8 seconds
She
usually.
did it in our roundtables.
I sure did.
Professionals.
Yeah. So one of the things that came up, I wish that had come up, but it didn't come up. But one of the things that did come up quite a bit, especially when we presented this to the National Youth Justice Network, was when we were talking about that discharge planning and making it, youth-centered, is people talked about accountability with that discharge planning, especially when working across partners. So some people talked about how there was, early discharge planning and that it was fairly comprehensive, and then the day would come, or the 2 days before the young person's going to be discharged, and suddenly the plan's falling apart. People aren't responding. People aren't taking up their bit of it. And so one of the big concerns was, how do we engage in accountability across these partners when you have a plan? How do you keep that? So it's not an answer, but it's related. Is like. Making sure everybody's at the table that needs to be at the table, but then the harder, messier, complex part was then how do you keep people to their words? And it was disappointing to hear how often that happens, that it falls apart.
Can I add? I'll just add one more piece to that answer too. Is I think that it probably raises an interesting question from your side of things, because as I mentioned earlier, one of the solutions was to allow people to maintain their financial assistance while they're in custody. So, was the cause of that eviction because that person was no longer able to pay their rent, or was it because of the stigma of having justice involvement? And that's kind of like the space that we're trying to bolster by saying, well, okay, let's work on the stigma, but at least if this landlord's still able to be paid their rent, then we have a space for that young person to maintain their housing. So I guess it comes down to like, what was the motivation
they
for
were still getting paid.
They were still getting paid?
How did they find out? How did the landlord find out?
Oh, yeah. Go ahead, Claire.
I'm
go
like
for
so
it. Jump
I would be interested to know what application was put before the board.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
An application based on stigma is discriminatory,
Yeah.
and cannot be proper before the board. Legal aid clinics in Ontario do landlord-tenant matters. That's their bread and butter, so that could be a legal resource available. ACTO runs a tenant duty council, so on the day of a hearing, they are available to provide legal advice. A youth detention facility should facilitate attendance at the hearing. For those in Ontario, some resources for you. Anyway, so there were just some things that came to mind for me.
But regardless of jurisdiction, it's still discriminatory. Like if they're getting paid, if landlord's being paid, there's no way that would be unacceptable.
Yeah, I'm not sure of how you would bring that claim, but yeah, it's and there are resources in other provinces. It's not that there are none. It's just that I'm not familiar with them. So again, just that call to action to investigate what might be available.
Hello. Well, it's not on. Is it on? Oh, they'll turn it up. Oh, there I am. Hello. I hate asking questions in front of large groups like this because I often trip over my words, but we're going to go ahead and give it a try. And Aaron and Anita, I'm particularly interested in what you presented because I sit on our Built for Zero Youth Steering Committee in Ottawa, and I tried my absolute darndest to get some sort of youth justice pathway into homelessness post-incarceration. And my God, let me tell you, it was hard. Yeah. And a lot of what I came across was the rules that would prevent. So even if we had early planning, the rules on release or going to a unit viewing, signing a lease, like all that stuff was really, it prevented us from actually taking any action. So I'm wondering, yes, it's bringing those groups to the table, it's holding them accountable, but what kind of plans did you see that were being put forward? Like, I don't know if you got into that level of detail or how they would have been successful, because I'm inspired to take another crack at it after seeing your presentation, because I think there are some things I can glean from here and make it work. But like, what kind of stuff were you seeing?
I think one of the things that we saw successfully, again, there was like this COVID effect where people were, doing stuff before and then committees and tables got like shut down. So we were starting to hear more about those things coming back. So having youth justice representatives at youth housing committee tables and like bringing those stakeholders back together. And I think one of the things that we kind of wanted to have happen from this exercise with the roundtables as well was facilitating connections among organizations that probably don't talk to each other very often unless they're brought into a Zoom room or whatever to talk about these issues. This is a bit out of sight, out of mind for folks who aren't working directly in the justice space necessarily. So I don't know.
Well, but I just think to your point, the reason we wanted to do this project at all, and I'm just so grateful that you pushed and advocated for that, because I just think there is such a reluctance, again, but in the homelessness sector, to just name that there is criminal justice involvement in a variety of ways. It's not always custody. It's not always it's interaction. Like I really want to grab your police searching you card here, right? Like in a variety, in a variety of ways. So it's like you're talking about like this. We're scared of the stories it's going to tell, but not telling it, I think is more harmful than like putting our head in the sand and pretending that it's not happening. So just thank you for what you're doing.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. I did have a question for Claire as well, because oftentimes we will experience that as well with IDs and possessions. So if we did get a youth connected to a clinic like that, what could we expect as a response?
So actually our website has a template letter that you can send to parents or caregivers to say this person has a legal right to their property. It doesn't need to be signed by a lawyer. Oftentimes when we write those letters and sign them, that can create a more adversarial environment. So we actually encourage, if there are other professionals, like perhaps that's a good first step before engaging a lawyer. But yeah, definitely check out our website. We have a template letter for that. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, depending on the arrangement, sometimes I change the language to be a little more, we want to be supportive of this young person as they enter into independence, to be able to access basic services, and other times it's more adversarial. So feel free to change it as you like.
We've got time for just one last question. I don't want people to run off right after it because I've got a few final words afterward, but I'll pass it up to you.
I just need to go back to the question about the eligibility. I know you were talking about the eviction application for eviction. How does that work for private? I'm also from Saskatchewan, and I think I know who she's talking about. So, what about application for housing? So, just application for an apartment, but for housing, or it's an apartment, but being denied because you have a criminal record.
Right. Yeah. Discrimination.
Sorry. So that's where I was wondering, does that still apply even if they haven't been in there yet? That discriminate?
Yes, in Ontario, yes. I can't speak to Saskatchewan.
100%, but it's something
I'd
challenge.
encourage you to take a look at your legal information resources and the legislation that applies there.
Right.
But yes, discrimination is rife in that space,
Right.
in applications for housing. And it's an ongoing issue that I'm speaking with the Human Rights Commission about because it's appalling. But absolutely, those legal rights still exist.
Okay.
And we can assist, again, in that space. Sometimes I'll contact a landlord and say, you can't make decisions on that basis. And sometimes that's effective, sometimes
Right.
not.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for your participation. And I want to just acknowledge that this session and the youth stream sessions wouldn't be possible without the support from the Home Depot Canada Foundation as well. We co-developed it with Away Home Canada and a ton of people that curated all of this. So a big thanks to them, and a big thanks to our presenters today. Maybe one more round of applause for those folks. And before you all take off, I just want to mention that if this was interesting to you, there's a ton more to come. Away Home Canada and Canadian Observatory on Homelessness and Making the Shift are putting together the Making the Shift International Conference on Youth Homelessness Prevention in Toronto in 2025 from February 24th to 26th. So you can look it up, or if you want to come talk to me, we can chat about getting you registered because registration is open. We'd love to see you there. But yeah, please do come and chat with our presenters as well, or if you have further questions. Yeah, there's lots of goodies up here, so thank you, everybody.